The next step is to configure which virtual machines we want to replicate and protect. And this is done using the concept of virtual protection groups, which are created from the source Zerto virtual manager that you want to replicate the VMs from. We simply click Actions, Create Virtual Protection Group. Let's give it a name. And to start with, I'm going to try creating a local replication of a file server VM. We select a priority, which is a built-in cause of the replication traffic. It's local, so I'm quite happy to put that high. I can then search for the VM, and this is just a list of all the VMs in the source vCenter or system center. It doesn't matter which host, which data store, which cluster, it's just the VMs available to replicate and protect. You can place multiple VMs in a consistency grouping to ensure that they're all replicated and recovered together to a consistent point in time, as well as the ability to define boot ordering to make sure, for example, database VMs come online first. Then we select where do we want to replicate these VMs to. So every single Zerto manager or Zerto cloud appliance that I have paired to this Zerto manager is now available as a replication target. And it doesn't matter which hypervisor, which version, which storage, or which cloud. This is where you see the benefits of Zerto being completely agnostic to the underlying technology. So I can replicate this VM locally to recover directly to production, to Azure, AWS, cross-hypervisor from vSphere to Hyper-V, or between different vSphere versions or the same vSphere version. Really, really simple, extremely flexible and powerful. For this first demo though, let's do a local replica. And this is a production VM in my production cluster. I'm going to replicate to my second cluster in DC1. So this could maybe be a dev test cluster. And I could select the whole cluster, or I could pin it to individual hosts within that cluster. I then see a list of all of the data stores available to that host. And then I can start to configure the SLAs around the journal retention and the replication RPO alerts. So journal history is a minimum of 1 hour, a maximum of 30 days. And in the advanced settings, you can specify different hard warning thresholds, as well as specifying a different data store in which to store the journal. For RPO alert, this is not a schedule. This is just an alert. If the recovery point objective goes above, for example, the 5 minutes here, you will be alerted by alarms and email alerts. And a test reminder, again, is just an alert that if this hasn't been tested in this 6-month period here, you will be alerted. We have some advanced settings, so you can change all of these per VM. If you want to have different maximum journal sizes, different journal locations, all of it configurable per VM. Next, we see a list of all of the VMDKs in the protected VM. You can set them to go to different target data stores, and a really cool feature is temp data. If you have a SQL database, for example, and you have the temporary database on a separate VMDK, select temp data here. We'll do an initial sync of the disk, but we won't waste any bandwidth or journal space replicating subsequent changes, which can save you up to 50% of your replication traffic and journal space usage, so very powerful feature. Then we need to select the recovery site network and folder mappings. So for a failover move, I want a production VM network. For testing, because this is a local replica, I'm going to use an isolated restore network. So it has no routing to production. This is just a list of all of the port groups that I've already created and presented to the host. So whatever network mapping you want for a test to make sure it's isolated, completely up to you. I then select a recovery folder. I can specify pre and post recovery scripts which are run from the target Zerto manager. And again, all of this is configurable on a per VM basis as well as a per NIC basis. If I wanted to send different NICs to different port groups or configure automatic re-IP addressing if I need that between the subnets or sites, you can configure that here in advance so Zerto automatically applies this using the VM tools. I've now created this protection group. I click Done, and Zerto is going to do an initial sync of these VMs in the background. The next step is configuring another protection group. I can protect a new group of VMs, the same VM, and for this demo, I'm going to demonstrate the new one-to-many replication feature in Zerto. So I'm going to pick the exact same VM and create a remote replica. Search for the same VM here. And you can see it's not in the list of unprotected VMs. Why? Because I just created it in a protection group. So we need to click on Advanced, select VMs, multi-target, and here we can see my file server already in a protection group. I click OK, next, and now I can select a different target site for the exact same VM, showing you the power of the one-to-many replication. Maybe I want to replicate this VM into Azure. I don't select a host because there's no concept of host in Azure. I still get my SLA settings around the journal retention and the RPO alerts and test reminders. I can still select the temp data capability, but again, there's no concept of data stores. It's all stored in a storage account. But one thing's very important is I can select the VM network, the subnets, the network security groups, and the instance family and sizing of all the VMs by default in the group. And I can change this for each VM to make sure that I'm selecting the correct size for this VM in a recovery scenario. And it's the exact same options if I come back to replication target here and select AWS. Again, SLA settings, same storage capabilities, and then the recovery I've got VPC network, subnet security group, and again instance family and type. And you can see extremely powerful, extremely flexible. Whatever settings you need, you pre-configure on this virtual protection group so that you don't have to worry about it in a DR scenario because you configured everything in advance. So for this demo, let's create one, and we're going to replicate between my own 2 data centers. So I'm selecting my vSphere Boston DC2. Again, I can select the cluster. I could select a resource pool. I'm going to tie it to an individual host. Select my data store. I'm going to keep a journal history of 1 hour. Next. Next. I'm going to select my VM network for failover, an isolated bubble port group for testing, and then recovery. I'll just select a folder I pre-created there. I have the same IP range between my sites, so by default Zerto is going to keep the exact same IP, and then I click Done. For your own proof of concept trial, I recommend creating a couple of test VMs, a Windows VM, maybe a Linux VM if you have them in production. Use those for your first replicas, both local and remote, so you can do full failovers, testing, and have no impact to production. And once you prove that out, then you can scale it out and start protecting some of your tier 1 production VMs to show the power of Zerto replication in real-world workflows. Once we finish this initial sync, Zerto will then be in a state ready for us to go to the next step of doing failover testing and file level restarts.